Good afternoon, everyone. In the interest of time, I think we'll get started. I'm sure the room will continue to fill in. This is a really special afternoon. We have a number of wonderful awards to make, and we are beginning with a really special one, the Lifetime Achievement Award. And it is really my honor to make this presentation. I started working on this a lot of times, and I couldn't find the right words or the right way to pay tribute to Debbie. But maybe we just start at the beginning. I understand the beginning is Joliet. Debbie's a lifelong resident of Illinois, and growing up in Joliet, she moved on to the University of Illinois in Urbana, obtaining a bachelor's degree in zoology, and matriculated to the Abraham Lincoln College of Medicine at the University of Illinois, Chicago. There are at least two people in this room who were her classmates in medical school: her husband, Neil, and her friend and fellow Academy member, Jerry Beth Carcos. Both of whom I thank for the terrific photos, and you can decide if they are reasonably flattering. It sounds like medical school held a lot of appeal for many, but not the least of which were the traditions of the MS1 crockpot Sundays in a community where the dormitory cafeteria wasn't open. So Deb and Neil, I guess, took responsibility to keep afloat this wonderful tradition of warm and nourishing food and music for their friends and classmates. You know, Deb moved along from medical school. She did a pediatrics residency, a whole pediatrics residency at the University of Chicago, and then a physical medicine and rehabilitation residency, a whole additional residency at what was then the Rehab Institute of Chicago, now the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab. And then with her feet firmly planted, she bloomed right where she was. Board certified in pediatrics as well as PM&R, Debbie also holds a certificate in pediatric rehabilitation medicine. I mention this because in her CV I learned she has certificate number 5. I wonder who the 4 people are who got there before her. I only figure she was holding the door open for them. Her CV shows her first job as attending physician at RIC, beginning as she finished training, and continuing through today, 33 years there, 31 of them as the director of the Cerebral Palsy Spasticity Management Program. Not to mention 18 years as Pediatric Rehabilitation Medicine Fellowship Director. She's achieved the rank of full professor at Northwestern University Feinberg School of Medicine. Her area of greatest interest is cerebral palsy and spasticity management, but she has put her hand in her heart in many other pots, when duty called or when she was needed. Debbie excels as a clinician. Yes, her patients and families love her. I know this because her nurse Bev and her admin Pat, who definitely love her too, gathered photos and video testimony from families paying tribute to their cherished Dr. Gabler. My inbox overflowing. And for a person who is truly a clinician, Debbie has been exceptionally productive as a researcher. Her research is always collaborative, always grounded in clinical needs. Deb's explored spasticity interventions, especially botulinum toxins, but also dance and robotics. She has a stellar record with her bioengineering colleagues in pursuing technology and robotic therapy. Deb's participated in dozens of funded research projects with at least 4 presently active. The volume and breadth of her published work is remarkable, but especially noteworthy, and yet not surprising given Debbie's way of connecting people, is the fact that she has over 50 individuals as co-authors on her papers. and she shares her knowledge quite widely. I ran out of fingers and toes as I counted her many educational efforts. 55 courses domestically, 19 of them at this Academy meetings, dozens of invited lectures, 22 different countries. And isn't this sharing and nurturing where Debbie really shines? She is one of those people who is a connector. Photo after photo, and I mean that, photo after photo. Deb with colleagues and trainees, always smiling, always with her arms wrapped around others. And she's been a pillar of the AACPDM. She's served on at least 5 different standing committees as well as the Scientific Program Committee. She was our president in 2010. And didn't we all have a great time at that meeting in Scottsdale? The theme was Frontiers in Innovation, with the security guards on segways and the bagpipes on the golf course. Yeah. But even today, Deb is serving her academy as the chair of the Publications Committee. And she's generous, sharing her time and talent with the American Academy of Pediatrics and the AAPM&R as well. But it wouldn't be a story of Deb's lifetime achievement without her family. Her husband, Neil, and daughters, Becca, Katie, and Sarah. Sounds like a great time growing up in that house. And in all the comments about Deb and how she built marvelous relationships with her patients and families and colleagues, so many people also commented, referencing her family and the amazing job she and Neil did raising those 3 girls. Sarah wrote, oh, oops. This is just Deb living her giant big life outside of work. I laughed, and no one will be surprised that she said, well, yeah, we downsized, moved downtown. Now it's very convenient for me to go to demonstrations. And her daughter, Sarah, who wrote an amazing tribute to her mom. I'm sorry I can't read all of it to you. I will say that it just sang of Deb's enthusiasm for everything, from ice skating to art to the Cubs, her insistence on adventures to visit the Corn Palace in South Dakota, or think about getting a goat farm, or just the carpe diem attitude that would engender countless spontaneous detours to places like, I don't even know how to say it, Cahokia Mounds State Park. Apparently, a car full of scowling teenage girls was transformed by a beautiful and challenging hike with their mom. So much so that I understand the family is visiting our own Serpent Mounds Park tomorrow. So, Deborah Gabler-Spera, so deserving of this Lifetime Achievement Award. In fact, she has already created ripple after ripple and lifetime upon lifetime of achievement. A persistent, joyful, determined drumbeat, growing as she brings drummer after drummer under her wing and into the parade. Deb doesn't merit a Lifetime Achievement Award because she built a massive research program or amassed an H-index of 200. She merits this award because she built a cadre of caring, skilled, and visionary professionals and amassed a circle of genuine care that reaches all of us and all around the world. Deb is the embodiment of mentoring, growing, and loving, both life itself and all those who share it with her. She is truly deserving of the Lifetime Achievement Award. I'm honored to present the AACPDM Lifetime Achievement Award to Deb Gabler. Congratulations.
Oh dear. Thank you, Gilda, for that award, the honor, and the recognition. And thanks to the program committee for putting on another great meeting. I should know I've been attending these faithfully since 83. Everybody knows I'm an unabashed, enthusiastic jump, both feet in the water, participant and supporter of the AACPDM. It is a quintessential team meeting. We share our experiences, our research, and concern for the child, family, each other during the meeting. This is unique in many professions and only recently has begun to be appreciated by the other medical fields. The understanding of the child with CP has changed dramatically, like we learned this morning. The knowledge base and science has exploded, treatment is now targeted, and bit by bit we are teasing apart those complex issues of impairment that impact function. With the rapid progress, we also have to adapt to our clinical practice as well. It's oftentimes not that ideal melting pot, but a standoff between economics, insurance, best practice. At times frustrating, as the economics continue not to always be in the favor of the children with disability or adults. We come together to work out the theoretical and the practical. Now, rehab has always been a prominent player in this academy, from George Deaver, the founding member, and in the early years, Harriet Gillette, Bob Christopher, my immediate mentor, Michael Alexander, and now Gilda. Since 2003, PEDS rehab medicine has been recognized as a subspecialty, and now there are a whopping 245 board-certified pediatric rehab docs. But there are many more committed physiatrists or physical medicine rehab docs that provide this care to children and, importantly, to the transition to adulthood, which has become a concern for our academy. So the AACPDM, even though there's only 245 of us, there's at least 270 members in the academy. It sounds like voting in Chicago, right? And I'm proud to say that at the Strategic Planning Committee, or at the meeting, there were PEDS rehab docs who were represented as presidents, past presidents, board members, committee chairs. And pediatric rehab has done so much work for the academy, in particular in the service of advocacy, like Lisa Thornton, the Lifespan, Kevin Murphy, and even within the photography field, Bob Rainey. I told you. These two organizations have been my professional home, but my career home has always been the Rehab Institute of Chicago, now the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab, and Lurie's. Since 1987, I've had the pleasure of working side by side with Bev Tan and Lou Diaz in our CP clinic. If it's Wednesday, it's CP clinic. And then I hurry off in the afternoon to the Lurie's neonatal ICU to work with the very committed team there, who is also represented here today. That couldn't happen without the glue to make me know where I'm supposed to be without Pat Hill, who is center stage, by Jim Sliwa, who surprised me from the Institute. Chicago has a wide network of committed, passionate people. We are the city that works together, and we strive to make it that, including the Northwestern Physical Therapy, Teresa Moulton, Donna Hurley, Pathways Awareness, which is a very big part of the Chicago scene, and also the University of Chicago, Mike Massall. Of course, my true family and my true lifetime achievements provide the stability, humor, and sustain me. Many of you know Neil, Becca, Katie, and Sarah, and hopefully I have some time with them tonight. I've been thinking about that most appropriate quote to sum up this Lifetime Award, and truly hope it isn't the end of my lifetime and that this is really the Junior Achievement Award. But it could be running out, I know. But I think that there were many quotes that I was thinking of, but I think the best is summed up by the one that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So together we have come far, and thank you.
Wait, Debbie. Well, that's a tough act to follow, but I think we have just the right person to fill those shoes. We have a presidential guest lecturer, Dr. Rupa Patel. She'll be speaking on making digital voice personal to foster meaningful social connection. Rupa Patel is a professor at Northeastern University with joint appointments in the Departments of Communication Sciences and Disorders and the College of Computer and Informatics Science. A native of Canada, she earned her bachelor's degree from the University of Calgary, her master's and PhD from the University of Toronto, and postdoctoral training at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Rupal's research focuses on speech motor control in healthy talkers and those with neuromotor speech impairment. This empirical evidence is then applied to the design of technologies that enable, enrich, and enhance communication. She has many peer-reviewed journal articles, presented at several hundred national and international conferences, and garnered over $10 million in research fundings from the NIH, the National Science Foundation, and private foundations. Several years ago, she founded Vocal ID, a technology company that is at the forefront of voice preservation, restoration, and analytics. Today, over 26,000 speakers from around the world are sharing their voice on the Human Voice Bank platform to power the creation of unique vocal identities for those living with voicelessness. Her work's been featured on TED, NPR, and in news and technology outlets, including the Wall Street Journal, Wired, Bloomberg, and BuzzFeed. She was recently named one of Fast Company's 100 most creative people in business. Please welcome her.
Good afternoon. I'm just going to get set up and then we'll get going. Before I do, I want to say congratulations, Dr. Gabler, for your lifetime achievement. Okay. Well, thank you. I think I need to stand over here, otherwise you won't hear me. Thank you, Gilda, for that introduction. And it's just an honor to be here today. I've heard much about the Academy and have been sort of following it from the sidelines in terms of where speech-language pathologists sort of interact with this community. I have spent most of my life working as a speech-language clinician initially, but then in academia in the Communication Sciences and Disorders department. First at Columbia University, and I think I probably have some colleagues from there here, which I'd love to meet with you later, and then now at Northeastern University. So what I'm going to talk about today is individuals who have to use communication devices to talk because they have severe communication impairments, typically due to cerebral palsy. Of course, there's also other reasons for why individuals may use devices to communicate, but we'll focus today on cerebral palsy. So just for disclosure, as Gilda mentioned, I have started a company called Vocal ID a few years ago, and this is a technology company that primarily builds technologies that allow individuals to have personalized voices. The technology initially was focused only on individuals who were unable to speak and use devices to communicate, like AAC devices. But there's also broader application of this technology in our world of voice-first interfaces. And how many of you have an Alexa at home? Or a device you speak to? Yeah, you all have laptops, you all have phones and so on. And many of our interactions with devices are becoming voice first and not text or typing based. And in that case, the technologies that we develop for individuals who are non-speaking actually have broader applications. And the reason that's really good is because that will speed up the evolution of the technologies for those who need it most. We are funded by the National Institutes of Health as well as the National Science Foundation to take the work that started in the laboratory and to spin it out to have sustainable impact long term. Okay, so I first want to start off with a little excerpt that I want to read to you. The reason is because this book by Sharon Draper called Out of My Mind, which many of you may have read if you have a middle schooler. It's often a middle school reading book over the summer that's been assigned for the last few years. It's a beautiful book about a girl named Melody. Melody has cerebral palsy, and in this book, Sharon Draper really talks about what it feels like in order to be trapped in a body that can't move, but to have a mind that's fully active, and all of you know that because you're tapping into just that with all of the work that we do in this field. And so let me read that to you. Very early, I figured out that there were millions of words in the world. Everyone around me was able to see them, bring them out with no effort. Everybody uses words to express themselves, except me. And I bet most people don't realize the power of words. But I do. That's so powerful to me. What she's saying there is, Sharon Draper actually did a lot of research to write this book. She doesn't have personal contact with someone who has cerebral palsy, and I think she really captures this essence in this book. Then she goes on to say, this is all from the perspective of Melody. I guess the question I get asked the most, in a lot of strange ways, variations, is, what's wrong with you? People don't often know if I'm sick, or if I'm in pain, or if the condition can be fixed. So I prepared two answers. One, that's polite, and one that's a little smart-mouthed. To those who are genuinely concerned, I push a button to say, I have spastic bilateral quadriplegia, also known as cerebral palsy. It limits my body, but not my mind. I really think I like the last part. It's really cool. To people that, like Claire and Molly, schoolmates of hers, she has this programmed. We all have disabilities. What's yours? She can't wait to use that one. So the reason I'm using this to frame the conversation is that these are the people that we're talking about. So we know that cerebral palsy is such a spectrum, but this talk is really focused on those whose bodies are trapped, whose minds are trapped, in their bodies, and they have to use assistive communication to let those ideas be free. I think the awareness of cerebral palsy in the last decade or so has been increasing. We know that disorders like autism and ALS have had great marketing campaigns, I'd call them really, in order to increase awareness about what it means to live with conditions like that. Cancer was the same with Livestrong and so on. But with cerebral palsy, it's more recent. Now you're seeing comedians like Maysoon Zayid she has the TED Talk, which if you haven't seen it, it will give you the giggles. It's fantastic, but she's now also in a sitcom. And so she talks about pursuing your dreams despite that. Now she doesn't have a very severe communication impairment. This next show, though, many of you have probably seen, Speechless on ABC, features a young man who is unable to speak, has a wheelchair, uses a communication device to talk. But rather than have that device use a computerized voice, Hollywood casts a 30-something-ish, kind of happy, hipster, funny guy as this individual's voice. And how does he pick that voice? Well, he picks that voice after sort of a lineup of people come to him and audition to be his voice, right? So it's kind of a misfit because it doesn't look at all like him. Culturally, you say, well, why this guy? But he chooses him potentially because it conveys a part of his personality that he'd like to project. And so I ask you to think about that because voice is deeply personal. Each of our voices tells a story, and our voices are, in fact, our identities. Every single person up here on the screen has a unique voice, and if you didn't see their faces, but you just heard their voices, you'd know exactly who they are. They're famous people with famous voices. And it is their identities. In fact, it's the way that we remember them. It's the way that we know who they are. Unfortunately, today's digital voices are quite lifeless in comparison. You know, by the year 2021, the number of voice-first interfaces is going to outnumber the number of humans on this planet. By 2022, it's estimated that each of us will have between 10 to 15 devices that talk. And I'm not just talking about microwaves and fridges that tell you what's in it, you know, or when your food is ready, but I'm talking about actual conversational AI. Now, there's been major advances in how we speak to systems or computers. We speak actually very fluently to them, and they understand us. It used to be that we would have to say very strict sentences, and a computer would recognize us. Today, we speak pretty freely, and that has implications for doctors when they're in the patient, in the class, in the office, when they're dealing with the patient. It has implications for across the entire breadth of different verticals, from education to medicine to healthcare and so on. And I think it's going to be the big change is going to be, what do we do with the voice output? Now, these computers recognize all sorts of accents, people of all ages, even people with minor tremors and some disabilities. But the voice that speaks out loud to you, it's a handful of voices. They all kind of sound the same. They're pretty vanilla. You don't hear random accents. You really don't even hear voices that are maybe not so desirable. Maybe they're a little nasal. Maybe they're a little breathy. Maybe they're a little wobbly. Why not? Every single person in this room has a different voice, and it's how we attach to them. Yet our devices are not following suit. And you know, maybe that's a problem when you're talking about education or how a marketing campaign is going to have an impact on someone. But it really is a problem for people like this young girl, Maeve. This is a young girl that I met when she was around 9 years old, and we've now been following her and building a voice for her and having it evolve over time for her. But she used a voice that was fit for a 40-year-old woman, not for a 9-year-old girl when she was first talking. And she'd had that voice since she was little. In fact, that same voice was also used by several of her classmates. That same voice, sometimes she might hear it at the ATM. You know, that same voice might be in an advertisement for a communication device manufacturer. That voice was not her. It was not Maeve. I can tell you countless classrooms that I've stepped into where we've seen the same voice coming from different places, and you can't actually figure out who is talking. We wouldn't fit, you know, a little girl with the prosthetic limb of a grown man. Well, why do we give everyone the same voice? So the problem is that actually creating a synthesized voice is very difficult, it's time-consuming, and it's expensive. And the reason it's expensive is because you have to have a voice actor recording hours and hours of audio, and then you have to transform that audio, those audio samples, into a digital voice that can say anything, right? It's not as if those recordings are then actually used themselves. They're used to train a computer that can learn to speak. It used to be, in the old days, that those little bits of speech, old days I actually only mean even 10 years ago, and most of the devices that you have now, the little bits of speech were glued together in order to make a synthetic voice. Today, with new advances in artificial intelligence, we're actually taking human speech, training a computer using deep neural networks, and building a system that can say things that that human didn't say at all. And that can sound spooky a little bit, but what's interesting about that is now you can preserve the voices of those who are losing their voice, and you can actually give voice to those who don't have one. So let me tell you a little bit more about how we do that. So until very recently, building a synthetic voice was tens of thousands, if not millions of dollars. So for the Siri voice, for example, that voice has been overworked and it's been so clearly polished that it's millions of dollars, it's unknown millions of dollars to build that voice. But there are other voices. There's many voices that are in more the hundreds of thousands of dollars. what we set out to do in this project that was funded by the National Science Foundation back in 2007 in my laboratory was, could we build a voice for hundreds of dollars? That was so far-fetched then. Today, it's actually a reality. It's maybe a few hundred more than we need it to be, but the pace of acceleration is massive. What we had to do is go back to source filter theory of speech production, and I want to step you through that a little bit. Now, if someone who has cerebral palsy, you can't have them record thousands of sentences for us to build a voice for them. So how is it that I can make a voice for someone who is non-speaking and make it sound as close to what they would have sounded like had they been able to speak? That's where we have to go back to theory and try to figure out a way that we can harness whatever sound they can still make and almost graft it onto someone else who is able to speak. So here's what we do. Speech production is sort of a combination of two things. The first is the vocal fold vibration that we call the source. Okay, this produces sort of a buzz-like sound, which I'll play you in a few minutes. But that's a really important part of your vocal identity. From there, though, that sound is pushed through the rest of the vocal tract, the chambers of your head and your neck. These are morphed and shaped in ways so that we can hear consonants and vowels. Now, for someone with severe cerebral palsy and severe dysarthria due to it, they're not going to be able to produce consonants and vowels because they can't move that musculature, but their source is preserved. So what we do is we separate the source and the filter, and we just take the source characteristics that are preserved from the individual who is non-speaking, and we borrow the filter from individuals who are able to speak, who are similar to them. We know that across the course of development, there is a lot of changes in voice. You've heard young kids sound very different than their adult counterparts, right? So there's this gradual change in your voice over time. In fact, that happens throughout your entire lifetime. And so we have to find voice donors that are similar in age and also in size. So if I mixed my voice with Gilda's voice, we might have an okay voice because we're sort of similar in build. But if I mix my voice with someone a lot taller and even another gender, it's going to sound off or wrong, right? Okay, so there are several characteristics in the source that are most prevalent for vocal identity, and those are the pitch of the voice, the loudness of the voice, and the tempo of the voice. So when we separate source and filter, we have these combinations. We sort of pull apart speech digitally, and then we recombine it digitally as well. And when we recombine it, we can take just the source of the non-speaking individual and combine it with just the filter of their voice donor. Okay, so hang on to that thought for a second. Now, this science is what I presented back in 2013. It feels like it was an eon ago. It was 5 years ago on the TED stage. And at that point, it was really just an idea, a scientific idea, and we were describing what we were doing in the laboratory. We had a handful, maybe a dozen people who we'd made voices for, and we were trying to figure out, how do you scale this? At that point, it was still hundreds of thousands of dollars to just make those few voices. But at the very end of my talk, what's interesting about things like TED is that they force you to take not just the idea, but what is the call to action? I didn't have a call to action about 2 weeks before this talk was being presented. And they kept pushing me to say, well, what do you want people to do? And I said, well, I want people to know it's not right that there are people with AAC devices who have to use a handful of voices. And back 5 years ago, it really was more a handful of voices. But they're like, no, that's not good enough. Well, you're just going to make people feel guilty. So what? So at the end, I kind of threw in this, well, what if you could donate your voice? What if you could come into the laboratory and read a few hundred sentences, and we could use those then to build voices for lots of people? We thought maybe a couple hundred people would sign up for this. Well, within the first couple of months, we had thousands of volunteers. And I thought, well, they're volunteering, but there's no way they're actually going to follow through because it takes 7 to 8 hours to read all this stuff. And then a few months go by, and I start seeing more and more people who are actually signing up. So that was the impetus to turn this to build the first voice bank portal. And this is an online platform where you go and you record your speech from anywhere. from the comfort of your own home with a headset microphone that costs $30, and this is what took off. So what happens is, I'm going to step you now through how someone contributes their voice. It's a dashboard, nothing too exciting, tells you who you are so that you don't record in someone else's profile. Believe me, there's many people who start recording and then their spouse also records, and it's impossible to go through thousands of recordings and separate them. Well, it's not impossible, it's just too expensive to do. So the first thing that happens in the portal is that you're asked whether you're in a quiet room, whether you're using a certain kind of browser and so on, and basically it's guiding you through step by step how to make the voice donation process. It'll check the ambient noise level. If it's quiet in the room, you can proceed. If it's not, you have to move to a quieter space. And then we ask the person to say, ah. From that, actually, we get a lot of information. We figure out whether the microphone is placed in the right location and so on. We also get a little bit of information about them that's going to be used for voice typing down the line. Then they're asked what kind of reading do they want to read? Do they want to read about science? Do they want to read about music? What do they want to read about? And then they begin reading. So sentence by sentence, they read whatever's on the screen. So there's no privacy issues here. They're just reading. Why do we ask them to read? Because we're trying to get from them the speech that we need to then build the voice. We're now starting to do things that are actually more conversational so that we can get conversational speech, because read speech is pretty different than conversational speech. Okay, so that continues for hours, but of course you can do it in a few minute chunks as well. So today, as Gilda mentioned, there are 26,000 speakers on the platform. They range in age from 6 to 91 from 110 countries. And I just want to give you a little essence of what their voice sounds like.
Hi.
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 How are you today?
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 So you get the diversity of the voice there. You also hear that some recordings are really high quality, others are echoey. I mean, those were good samples. There's a lot of dog barking in the background. There's a lot of random stuff going on. Why? There's music sometimes playing in the background. If that stuff's there, it's going to end up in the speech. And so we've had to develop a lot of different tools in order to figure out how to separate these things. And it's a good thing that our lab is pretty interdisciplinary, and now the company is also very interdisciplinary. So the first thing we have to do is actually clean all this audio automatically, because with 13.5 million sentences, you're not going to be able to clean those manually, right? So here might be a raw sample might have mouse clicks in it and other aspects. So mouse clicks are pretty easy to remove. So it might sound like this.
Please tell me if you don't understand what I am saying.
So there's two things. There's a mouse click at the back, and then there's a microphone bounce at the beginning. So if I come really close to this microphone, and if I actually almost touch that microphone, you'll hear this bounce. We have to remove that. That seems like an easy thing to do, but it actually has huge implications on the acoustics, and it's really difficult to just remove that and not distort the speech. So the clean audio sounds like this.
Please tell me if you don't understand what I am saying.
It's incredible what the difference is when you build a voice with raw or dirty audio and with clean audio. It can make the difference between making that sound more human-like and making it sound completely robotic. Okay, so that's step one. Now, once you have clean audio, let's say that the individual who recorded the speech was someone who was actually losing their voice. We can recreate their voice for them through this process where we feed in the clean audio, and then we use it to train what's signified here by this image is a deep neural network, which is just a very fancy algorithm that tries to find meaning in that speech and model it. Okay, so we're going to take clean audio, we're going to feed it to that system, and I'm going to play you the samples of what comes out. I'm first going to play you sort of one generation older speech, and then I'm going to play you at the end some more newer samples that we have today.
I wish we could get acquainted.
The only thing I liked in school is arithmetic.
So those are original samples of the speech being fed in, and here is the synthesized voice.
Sometimes the heart sees what's invisible to the eye. The best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others.
Now, it has his voice quality, but it still has this robotic sense to it. It's a little buzzy, and that's what we're trying to get rid of. So that's why the voices that you hear, the polished voices like Siri and Alexa, that's why they cost so much to build, because there are teams of linguists and engineers who are building out after this process, cleaning out the audio and making it so clean so that when you hear it, it's so smooth sounding and has the right prosody and melody to it. When you're trying to build a voice like we are doing for hundreds of dollars, you still are left with that. But you have to. If I want to make a voice for every individual who has cerebral palsy that is uniquely theirs, we have to be able to scale this. And there'll be a trade-off. It won't be as polished as Siri, but it should be more like them and not just vanilla cookie cutter, right? Okay. Now, legacy is one thing. A vocal legacy voice is just taking all those recordings and making it for that person. Bespoke is where it gets much more complicated because we have to now separate the speech signal and recombine it. All right, so let me step you through exactly how we do this with Maeve. So we first have to gather the voice sample. Now, this seems like the easy first step, but when you first try, you might hear something like this. Volitionally trying to get a voice sample from someone who's non-speaking can be funny, it can be humorous, it can be a struggle. It is a struggle, and there are many different, so it's not that they don't make sounds, we've all heard them make sounds. It's volitionally making that sound on demand that is the difficult thing. But when you persist, you finally get a sample that sounds like this. And that's what you need. So that's not an understandable sound in terms of what does she mean from that, but it has aspects of her voice quality that we can harness in order to build a voice for her. And so it's not much more than a few seconds of speech that we're getting in order to do the source filter separation. So the next step, as I was explaining earlier, is we have to separate the source and the filter. So that initial sound has, its speech is combined, the source and the filter. So that's her original sample. And now we're going to just remove the filter and just be left with the source. The filter gives it the characteristics of what she's trying to say. But that's not meaningful in this case. What's meaningful is her voice identity. That's kind of what you're left when you separate them, okay? Believe it or not, there's actually information in there. And that information, when combined with someone else's voice, is going to give us a voice that's more like hers. So the next piece we have to do is once we have the source separated, we have to go into our voice bank, and we have to try to find out who are the closest individuals who have a similar sounding voice to her, and along a number of different parameters. Not just the voice quality, but also in her demographic characteristics and the voice quality together. And so we do some math called this universal background model clustering algorithm, and we find the closest individuals to Maeve. And in this case, it happened to be her two sisters. And this is also because our database was pretty small at the time. It's now bigger, and it's usually not siblings. And in fact, mixing siblings together isn't always the best thing. Leads to more fights in the home. But what we can do once we have the donor identified is we do the same thing. We separate the source and the filter of the donor speech, and now combine just the source and the filter, the source and the filter of the donor and the recipient. And what you do then is you can feed in those samples into that same kind of model to build a voice. So the morphed samples are what are fed into the algorithm now in order to create the synthetic voice. So I'll play you the morphed samples, and then I'm going to play you the voice that we get.
Ice cream is my guilty pleasure. The brown fox jumped high. That man ran fast.
So that's a combination of both Maeve's as well as her donor morphed, and here's what we get at the end.
My name is Maeve.
It's amazing. I finally sound like a kid, and I have my own voice. I feel happy.
Again, buzzy. It's got some of her quality, but we're still working on this. This was about 1.5 years ago, and in a few slides, I'm going to show you where we're at today. The pace is advancing, but there's a lot of pain along the way, but we're learning. So it's interesting. You know, how do you iterate on the technology? When is it ready to go out? So when we first started, you know, I've been working on this project for, oops, did I disconnect something here? I did. Since 2007 in the laboratory, right? It took until 2016 to get more than just a few people to have these voices. Why? Because as researchers, it's never ready to release. It's never ready to release. But if you're in industry, you have to have a product out there in order to get information about how to change it. And it's actually painful in some ways because people tell you mean things. Or people tell you things you don't want to necessarily hear. But actually, they're telling you things of how you can improve. And that feedback is essential for changing the technology. And the pace is radically different than what happens when we're doing it in the laboratory and holding it as it's not ready yet. Okay, so in the last few years, I'm just going to advance this. I'm now out of sync for some reason. Okay, never mind at this, I'm just here anyway. I don't have control over my computer anymore. To those listening, help. Can you hear me back there? Oh, there you are. Hi. I think I pulled the cable.
Ice cream is my guilty pleasure. The brown fox jumped high. That man ran fast. My name is Maeve. It's amazing. I finally sound like a kid, and I have my own voice. I feel happy.
Okay, so back in 2014, it was, we needed about 7 hours of speech from the voice donor and about 40 hours of manual labor. That's probably being generous. It was teams of my students working on this work, so probably much more than 40 hours. By 2016, when we first started actually building out these voices at scale, we needed about 3.5 hours of speech from our voice donors. And today, it's more like 1.5 hours. And in fact, even with less speech, you can do pretty well with it. And far less human labor. That's the biggest thing about scaling this. But also, the big thing is understandability. So in these years, what's happened too is that the voices have gotten more and more understandable, and they've gotten more and more natural as well. The technology that we had in the laboratory was an older technology where you're gluing together bits of speech. Today, we're using deep neural networks. So there's a lot of change in the evolution of this technology. What's important, though, is the change for these individuals. There's 170 plus individuals today that have vocal ID voices. And they range from people who have cerebral palsy to individuals who have ALS, and most recently, many individuals who have head and neck cancer. AAC devices or communication devices are not commonly used by individuals with head and neck cancer. But now that everyone uses their phone, it's actually a really useful technology for them because they can type in there and continue to speak as themselves. These are 30, 40-year-olds who have a whole life ahead of them, I hope, where they can continue to sound like themselves. So there's a really great BBC documentary on a young man that we helped have his own voice again. So how do you use these voices? Well, you use them on any kind of talker, and we also have a couple of different apps for those who have more motor dexterity. These probably wouldn't be used by the individuals who have CP, but there are other applications like the Tobii systems as well as the PRC devices and so on that they can use our voices on. So one of these last slides now, I'm almost at the end of my presentation. I want to present to you the difference between Maeve's voice I showed you, which was sort of a 2017 model, and what we're doing today. So here's the voice you heard a few minutes ago.
My name is Maeve. It's amazing. I finally sound like a kid.
And here is the newest voice. Oh, I kept breaking this.
My name is Maeve. It's amazing. I finally sound like a kid.
Wow. All right, we're gonna just play this.
I can't wait for my friends to hear my new voice. My parents are really happy I'm not addicted to Fortnite.
So you can start hearing there's a bit more rhythm in this next voice, this next generation, and it doesn't have the same buzziness. So there's a change. I'm gonna save you all the going into this presentation. I'm gonna play you some different samples. Now here's a voice I think is a unique voice you wouldn't not normally hear because it's got this accent where there's no way this child would have had a voice like this if she hadn't had a personalized voice for her.
I'm almost 11 years old. I love the smell of my mother's hair after she washes it.
So, you know, this kid, what's interesting about this child is the mothers came to me and said, I want a personalized voice for my daughter because in my culture, when I go home, like back to my country, and I bring my daughter with me, they don't think of her as part of our family. It's so hard to hear that. But with this voice, she can be seen as who she is. I think that that's a game changer. So, before I get choked up on this, here's some other voices.
My voice can command a room and soothe a baby.
It takes courage to speak up and to listen.
Again, an accented speaker, one that you wouldn't normally hear.
My voice gives away my deepest secrets.
I give voice to my favorite causes.
This is my vocal identity.
This one is my favorite.
Sometimes the heart sees what's invisible to the eye.
No, I found the wrong one.
You can't blame gravity for falling in love.
That's a Nigerian voice. There are no Nigerian synthesized voices out there. And he's a cool dude. Okay, and so with that, this is my last slide. I'm gonna end on really where I derive my passion and my excitement for what we're doing and how I'm going to continue doing this and seeing how we can make this happen for many, many more people. So this last video captures this young boy named Oscar hearing his voice for the first time.
Oscar.
He is delicious. Okay, and that is all I have, so thank you. Thank you. I have plenty of time for questions.
Yes, thank you so much. Please come to a mic with your questions for Rupa.
Hi, Rachel. Kevin Murphy, Gillette Children's. A wonderful talk. Thank you very much. Just wondering, into the future now, is there a way to adapt these morph voices so they reflect different tonations and such, so the voice would potentially say the same sentence or two, but it would say it in a sarcastic way or a happy way or an angry way or a questioning way, or you could push the button and then push what kind of tone you wanted to put behind it, or...
Yes. I have to stand here. Absolutely. In fact, a lot of my research focuses on prosody, which is the changes in pitch and loudness and the melody of speech, what you're talking about, which has impact on the attitude as well as emotional aspects of speech. And that's something that is sort of the holy grail in synthesized speech, is how do we infuse speech with those. So there are hacks around that, things like you put an emoji and make that whole sentence sound sarcastic, or make it happy sounding and so on. And I think those are just hacks. The hardest part is figuring out how to have as few inputs that the individual is going to have to make in order to change what the voice can sound like. So there are many ways in which we can manipulate the speech that is produced, almost like a musician would use a MIDI board to create different prosodic elements. The hardest part is, how do you have someone who has limited motor control be able to do that within a few buttons. So that's something that we're working on. Not so much in vocal ID, but there are many labs around the world working on synthesized speech and emotion in speech. We have some versions of that in our app, but I would call those, I put them in the hack category right now. We're just trying to fix the voices first, and we'll move on to the emotion next, but hugely important. Thank you.
Mauricio Delgado from Dallas, Texas. Thank you so much, Dr. Patel, for your presentation.
Oh, thank you.
I have two questions. One is about singing, which is an important part of being humans, especially children.
Yes.
So how close are we to be able to get them to sing? And the second one is, are we going to be concerned about voice identity theft?
Oh, so the first one's easy, not close in terms of singing. The second one is tough. In fact, voice identity theft. So any good technology can be usurped for a bad cause. And more and more, as more and more technologies are using voice-based interfaces, there is more danger. One of the things that we're doing in our voices is putting a watermark in there, so you know that this cannot be stolen. And the reason that came about was we started seeing and hearing much more about synthetic voices being used to fool everything from getting access to your health records to your banking information. Almost all major banks today use voice authentication. And those can be spoofed, unfortunately, by synthetic voices. Believe it or not, even the ones that sound awful to our ears have some ability to fool systems. Now, there's advances being made there as well, where people are trying to figure out the algorithms so they don't fool the systems. But any new technology is going to have these ramifications. So watermarking is one way to do that. Another way to do that is to somehow figure out a way to make sure that the voices are not so human-like that they do fool us. So how many of you saw the Google Duplex demonstration? So there was recently in I think May or June, Google released its latest synthetic voices. And they take hours to build, but their idea was, this is what's coming. They wanted to plant that seed. So what they'd done is they'd had the system, the AI, call to make an appointment. I think it was a hairdresser's appointment and a restaurant reservation. And the person on the other line couldn't tell. So they essentially passed the Turing test, right? And people were upset. Like, you didn't tell me it was a computer calling me, and I thought I fell for it, right? And so the blurry lines between synthetic and real are not so sci-fi anymore, and we're going to have to figure out ways in which we can empower people, but also keep them safe. So thank you for your question.
Very, very impressive talk. I can hardly wait to chat with my SLPs when I go home. Are you partnering with other people to do the same thing in other languages? I am from the New Brunswick, and 1/3 of the people I work with are French speakers.
Yeah. Well, I'm also Canadian, so.
I know. I want you to come home.
Home is where you live, I guess, now, right? So in other languages, there's been a lot of conversation about, how to figure out how to build the voice bank first in the other languages, because that's where you first start. And as a company, we're not going there because it's just too much. We're 8 people, the people you saw up there. But I think over time, there are many efforts around the world where there are people working on other languages and synthetic speech. It's just that it's mostly the predominant ones that are resourced. It's not like you won't necessarily get the Newfoundland accents, you know. It's not even another language, right? And then in terms of French, so there is efforts in France for French, but I don't think there are any right now in French Canada.
I was going to say, if you just told the Newfies that you wanted them to talk, you get oodles and oodles. They are the best with oral tradition.
You can be my messenger. I am telling them we want them to talk.
Well, I can tell New Brunswickers, but not Newfies. It would be a bit of an extra flight for me.
Okay. Yeah. And that's the thing is, I think the most empowering thing is the fact that we do want voices, voices that where cultures have necessarily thought that they're not the ones it's not a desirable voice or it's not a desirable accent, but it is, right? It's not to mainstream, but if I lost my voice or if for example, my mother lost her voice, she doesn't want to sound like someone from, I don't know, Midwestern America. She wants to sound like who she is. Not that there's anything wrong from Midwestern America, but there is for a white-haired brown lady who's 76, you know? So it's about identity, right? So any other questions?
One last question, I think. Okay, hi, I'm Keiko Shikaku-Thomas from Montreal, Canada. My question is a fantastic presentation first. Very, very cool, interesting stuff. That last video was really fantastic. But my question is the intersection actually with technology development and research and clinical practice, which is something I'm doing in a different field. But how have you handled this transition, you know, like from crowdsourcing and all the ethical dilemmas that go with it, and in making something that is highly applicable in clinical practice, and there's lots of research that can be done with it, but that is also a product, right, a new technology and all that.
So when I started the company, I took a full-time leave of absence. So I'm actually on leave from Northeastern University right now. Last year, they wanted me to come back and teach because there's limits on how long you can be away from the university. This year, I'm back on leave. So the reason that it works is you must have a clean detachment. The university is incentivized for this technology to become something real, not because they have a stake in the company, because they want to see their work translated into clinical and societal benefit. That helps them with one of their missions, right? And so it's interesting because I think trying to do it with a foot in both worlds makes things very complicated, A. B, it doesn't go anywhere. Because you're only one person, and the amount of time it takes to get something like this off the ground and money, resources, and effort. So that's one. In terms of crowdsourcing, one of the biggest struggles is how, with new laws in terms of privacy laws, GDPR, which is the European Union laws, we have to treat data differently for the U.S. versus the EU. We decided to just have higher standards for everybody so we don't have to do these separate things, because truthfully the EU is just ahead of us, and soon we're going to all have to do that. So privacy and treating people's data in ways that they know how it's being used is really important. The other thing is, when I started off, this was a research project, and then we started moving it toward commercialization because you could only serve dozens of people in the lab. You had to get it out of the laboratory in order to have scale. But it's also unrealistic to think that you're going to only sell a product to people who have, who have cerebral palsy or ALS or whatever else, other conditions. It has to be a technology that has other applications in order for it to feed this market. So it has to have universal application. Otherwise, we're going to have kind of an old technology. It's not going to keep evolving. So that means that we have to do other things with the technology too. So we have to just be really transparent about this. And this is a fine line and a dance that we have to continue to be transparent about. So it's an evolution, and I'm happy to talk more offline as well. But good luck, just do it. Be a Nike ad now. Right. Thank you.
That was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. And Dr. Patel will be available in the speaker's corner after the session is over. Next, we have the chair of the Adapted Sports and Recreation Committee, Dr. Gavin Colquitt. He will be presenting the Duncan Wyeth Award.
Good afternoon. It is truly my pleasure to present to you today someone whose own personal efforts has truly transformed the journey of countless kids and adults with disabilities. Deborah McFadden was appointed by President George H.W. Bush as the U.S. Commissioner of Disabilities and served in this role from 1989 to 1993. She was the highest-ranking female with a disability in the Bush administration. As commissioner, she consulted and worked with various heads of state and foreign governments regarding issues related to independence, productivity, and inclusion for people with disabilities. During this time, she was also instrumental in the writing and passage of the American with Disabilities Act and was one of the original 12 authors. In 2004, she began advocating for her daughter Tatiana, at the time an emerging Paralympic athlete, at the 2004 Games in Athens, for inclusion in high school sports. 4 years later, in 2008, the Maryland Senate and House passed the Sports and Fitness Equity Act, also called Tatiana's Law, which ensures that students with disabilities have an equal opportunity to try out for and, if selected, participate in mainstream athletic programs. The Act also ensures that reasonable accommodations are provided so that all students have an equal opportunity to participate to the fullest extent possible. She has served on numerous boards and foundations, including the Girl Scouts Women Advisory Board, the chair of Parasports for USA Track and Field, Mitsubishi Electric America Foundation, the World Committee on Disabilities, and the Joint Council on International Children's Services. She is a founding member of Athletics for All, a nationwide organization that focuses on adaptive sport and inclusion for students with disabilities. Currently, she serves as a consultant for international and domestic companies for athletes with disabilities. She is the mother of 3 children, Ruthie, Tatiana, and Hannah. Both Tatiana and Hannah are elite Paralympic athletes. The Duncan Wyeth Award is presented to an individual who demonstrates outstanding participation in or promotion of sports and recreation and serves as a role model for people with disabilities. The award is named after Mr. Duncan Wyeth for his passion towards life and for encouraging people with disabilities of all ages to pursue interests and dreams based on their abilities. Deborah McFadden's lifetime of work and advocacy has had a lasting, profound impact on the lives of many young people by expanding and creating opportunities through sport. Because of her, countless people with disabilities are pursuing their dreams as they participate, train, and compete. It is my pleasure to present the 2018 Duncan Wyeth Award to Deborah McFadden.
Rupa, I did not want to get up here after you. That was a great talk. I want to take us back in the past a little bit to tell you where things have come, because certainly we need to learn from the past. A little bit about myself. I was in graduate school and I suddenly became paralyzed. I was paralyzed from the chest down. I spent 4 years in an electric chair and 8 on crutches. During that time, it was an interesting time. The moment I became paralyzed in trying to get services, and so you know, I wasn't just a straight A student, I was #1 in my grad class. So they had a year to see what I was like. But the people helping me said, oh, we got this great idea. And I drooled and I needed help dressing, feeding myself, and they were going to make me a telephone operator. And I had this baseball cap with a pen on the end, you know. I could, like this, I said, that's not what I want to be. Yeah, but it's really great. It was okay, we still had dial phones back then. I said, you should be pushing me into my highest income tax bracket possible, not my lowest one. When I went to graduate from school, I have a letter from the school saying we won't graduate you. And I said, why? And they said, because you're not employable. I'll get back to what happened after that in a second. But there were problems in school and housing and transportation. And I went back to some other notes I had. What was going on in that time? 1985, a court ruled that a child with CP who was not a, quote, physical threat, unquote, and was academically competitive, could in fact be excluded from public school because his teacher claimed his physical appearance produced the nauseating effect on his classmates. 1987, a young girl was barred from a movie theater because she was in a wheelchair and a fire hazard. 1988, the Washington Post reported a New Jersey zookeeper refused admission to the zoo with Down syndrome for fear they would upset the chimpanzees. And then in 1989, a young man with epilepsy was bodily thrown out of a bowling alley because the owner said he was causing lower scores with the other patrons. Really? So what has happened then? And I became very vocal with our U.S. government, and working on 94-142 and 503, 504. But President Bush called me, and he called, well, the White House did, and said, President Bush would like you to come work for him. I went, really? And they set up a time for him to call me. And I will tell you, I still in my chair, but when you get a call from the White House with the president about to be on the phone, you do want to stand up. And I said, sir, why are you asking me for this job? And the honest to goodness thing, he said, because McFadden, you're a pain in the ass, and I want you on my side against not working against me. I took the job. Actually, I think a couple years ago, the reporter asked him if that's true, and he goes, yeah, I remember her. Probably was true. I was highest ranking female with a disability. Sad statement, but I was commissioner, so I was over the Governor's Council, the DD Council, some of you know, the Protection and Advocacy System, all the lawyers, the university affiliated programs where we gave money. In fact, I missed that job because my signature authority was $100 million before I needed permission. I miss it very much. But when I went into this job, and I, before coming here, I grabbed some of the things that at the time that I wanted to work in. And not that you can see it, but I wanted to work on inclusion. We were still having problems then. Personal assistive devices. And I have a device back then, it was the prototype for voice recognition, that you could press an apple and it would say Apple, or it's old looking and it's really big. We wanted to work on empowerment. A new thing back then. And then I wanted to work on home ownership. But then what I really wanted to do is, as a group of us had been fighting, saying, we need a law. We need a law that takes care of all of these issues. And that law was the ADA. And we fought long and hard. We had groups together. Remember when Senator Harkins locked us in a room, I think it was 2 a.m. before we get out. He said, I'm sick of you all arguing. Because people who are blind were saying, we don't want these ramps and people in chairs, and we didn't want people with HIV, we didn't want people who are grossly overweight. He said, you're all going to get together. And when you walk out of this room, you're going to be a team. And we were. And I remember clearly the day of the passage of the ADA. I was in the Senate gallery, and the interns were running back and forth, the lobbyists trying to drum up support for and against the different provisions of the law. But what was most important to me is, as I looked into the gallery, there were people with disabilities. There were people who were blind and deaf, and people in wheelchairs, people with CP. We were all there. We were a microcosm for whom this law was going to benefit. And for the first time, we, people with disabilities, were speaking for ourselves, saying, we belong here and now. Well, the law passed, and it's been exciting to have this law. And there have been lots of changes. But remember, back then, we were still fighting to be in school, to be on the front of the bus. And we've come a long way. Even, Rupa, when you talk about since 2007 to 2017, things have changed. I can't talk about the past without bringing up my daughter. You heard that I have 3 adoptive children. Tatiana has spina bifida. Hannah has, for those in orthopedics, PFFD, proximal femoral focal deficiency. We amputated her leg. And Ruthie was adopted at 9 and makes it clear she doesn't like to sweat. The others can do sports. But a little bit about Tatiana. I was told, I adopted her from Russia when she was 6.5 and was told that she would not live long. And she was very sick. When I put her in school, it was unbelievable. They put her in a separate bus, so all the neighborhood's kids got picked up on one bus, and they sent one bus just to pick her up. And I went, oh, that's not happening. And yeah, President Bush's comment about me, yeah, I can be a pain in the you-know-what. So the school said, you're putting her on the bus. She belongs with the neighborhood kids, her friends. Then she went out on the playground, and they said she couldn't be on the playground. I said, why not? And they said, well, she could hurt herself. Really? So I walked into the principal the next day with an envelope. She goes, what's that? I go, it's a get-out-of-jail-free card. My daughter has the same right to break her collarbone as everybody else. She goes, you want her to break it? I said, no, but she has the same right to do that. And then I thought, I need to get her involved in sports because she was very sick. And I thought, you'll get stronger. So I got her involved in swimming and then wheelchair basketball and archery and downhill skiing, and she got stronger and stronger. And she learned more skills. And you learn skills through sports. You learn fair play and how to get along. And furthermore, when all the other parents are talking about my kid played ice hockey, yeah, my kid did too. Yeah. Oh, basketball, yeah, my kid does it too. So she got involved in that, and she took off in track. And as Tatiana said, it probably was the need for speed that she had. But in wheelchair sports, you do not hit your prime until your late 30s, early 40s. Now, Tatiana in juniors was winning all the medals, and she said in 8th grade, she goes, I want to try out for the Paralympics. All right, well, I'll bring you there, because I figured she'd see other adults and be a role model. Well, lo and behold, she made the team. And the Olympic Committee said, well, just so you know, she's not going to win a medal, but this will be a good experience. Tatiana won a silver and bronze medal. Youngest person ever. She comes home from Athens and starts high school. And her first day of school, she comes home and says, Mom, it's going to be great. And I said, well, why? She said, because the principal said there's a lot of clubs and we should join one. I said, well, what are you going to join? And only as you with kids understand, she rolled her eyes and went, duh, track. Now, for those of you who don't know, track is not a tryout sport. You show up, you're given a uniform, and you run around the track. You may not advance to states or regionals, but you're on the team. So Tatiana showed up as the 2nd and 3rd fastest in the world. And she was told, not only verbally, but in writing, you can't be on our team, there's clubs for kids like you, and you need to run with your own kind. So I told her, you must have misunderstood, because all mothers say if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. So you go back and ask. Well, in fact, they put it in writing. So she hemmed and hawed about it, and she said, what about my sister Hannah, an amputee? And I said, I don't think when she gets there they'll let her. That's not right. I said, well, we've tried, and the only thing we can do now is sue. And if we sue, nobody's going to like you. She thought about it, and she said, well, we got to sue. So I said, all right. So I went to the school, and I said, look, I'm asking for 2 things. Give her a uniform and let her run around the track. I didn't ask her to compete. And they're shaking their head. I said, but before you say no, I want you to know that I have 400 attorneys that work for me. I'm one of the original authors of the ADA, and I know everybody. So you should, so just give her a uniform. Yeah, well, can you believe it? The school said, sue us. So, and you know, as a woman, you can't yell and scream because then you're hysterical. So my mode of operation just is to go, okay. So we filed the suit, and we filed the suit for no damages. So when the media came and said, how much are you suing for? I said, nothing. They went, what? I said, I'm suing for opportunity, for the right to participate. So we sued, and in our county, Howard County, Maryland, and we won there. And it was really, it was an amazing case. 5 hours, they kept them on the stand, and anyway, we won. But then the state writes to me. It's really stupid because, you know, you win lawsuits by pounds of paper, and they kept writing to me, you can't do it, you can't do it. And I said, do you understand? I'll sue you. And if I sue you, I'm going to win. In fact, when Tatiana ran her first race in high school, there must have been 30 photographers there. And the front page of the Washington Post has a picture of me leaning down, and the caption is, Tatiana's mother giving her words of encouragement before her first race. And what I really was saying, do you want mommy to get rid of all those people? So anyway, we filed a suit with the state. And Tatiana said, let's just make a law. And I said, you're killing me. You're just killing me with this work. But all right, so we wrote a law. And we got other groups, the Women's Sports Foundation, to sign on. And Tatiana, who was little, if you see her muscles now, they're enormous. But she went around to the elected officials and basically said, how would you like it if your son or daughter wanted to play with their friends and nobody would let them? In the first year, the Sports and Fitness Equity law passed in 1 year. It's akin to Title IX, and it says, if you have a disability in a school, you have the right to participate. And if not, we'll take away funding from the school. It's historic. And then she said, let's make it federal. So I brought Tatiana and Hannah to speak. We met with President Obama and his staff, and both Tatiana and Hannah gave a very compelling talk. And 7 years ago, I think it's been 7 years, it became federal. So every school in America, if the child is in a public school system and has a disability, they have the right to participate in sports, AKA Tatiana's Law. So, in fact, if you ask Tatiana what she's done significant in her life, she never brings this up. I think it's a big deal. So where are we now? And we've come a long way. You know, I just love to walk around. I walked in and I see all these sports brochures, pictures up there of kids with disabilities doing sports. Who would have thought that back when I'm just still trying to get my education? Oh, and as a side note, the dean of the school who didn't want to graduate me, he came and applied for one of my multi-million-dollar grants. Yeah, Senator Dole said, do you know the commissioner? And he said, no, I don't. And I went, oh, we do. Yeah, he left about 10 minutes later. Yeah. But a long way. Life is different now. And back when we were just trying to say we belong in school, we belong on the bus, we belong in housing, now we're fighting for sports. Now we're doing voice recognition, and not voice recognition of pointing, it's an apple, but I want to eat. I don't want an apple. I'm cookie. I want an Oreo cookie, not this. And we do it in different accents. I'm going to find kids for you. I know kids. Parents, I spend a lot of time talking to parents, and I tell parents, your child has a disability. All right. Get over it, they have a disability. But you can't overprotect them. It just makes me really annoyed when I see these parents out pushing their kid in the wheelchair. Just let them push. Oh, but they get tired. So does my neighbor's 3-year-old who, you know, walking in the mall, 3-year-old walks, and when she gets tired, the mom picks her up, carries her a bit, and puts her down. You can't get stronger unless you let kids try things themselves, unless they fall down. I talked yesterday about to orthopedic doctors, and it was a great talk. And I said, what do you do when a child is born, the family says, they got CP, what do you tell them? Well, what I would tell them and what an orthopedic surgeon tells them is different. Here's a diagnosis. But what I tell them is, your child can be anything they want. They can be president of the United States. They can be, CEO of a tech company. We need to stop saying, the day you're born, you'll be less than. It's like with Tatiana, you'll be less than. Hannah, less than. No, you can be anything you want. They may grow up to be X, and I'm going to be proud of them. But it is the most important job they'll have, and I'm proud. But you can be anything you want. I spend time with companies and sponsors now. So the sponsors at the Olympics, they used to have people with disabilities there. It was all the Olympians. Tatiana now is the highest paid Paralympian in the world. She's got a great negotiator. Yeah, and they have to fly me first class too, not just her. So, Tatiana, you may have seen her. She's been on the Ellen Show. She's been on the Nike ads, the Super Bowl ads. She was on 1 billion Coke bottles here in the U.S. And it is pretty cool as a mom seeing someone drink a bottle with your daughter on it. She's on a McDonald's cup. She's on ads. She is all over the world. Who would have thought that? A child born with spina bifida is going to be known around the world. In London, we were at the theater, Tatiana and I. We had 4 people come up and said, "Are you Tatiana?" When we go to Boston for the marathons, we have to be escorted through the airport because people are asking for her autograph. By the way, Tatiana, the marathons, in 2000, they started including, well, they had wheelchair athletes, but they approved them as part of the elite athletes. So the marathons, London, Boston, New York, Chicago, Berlin, and Tokyo are the 6 major marathons. All of them have an elite field for athletes, and they're all paid. They're paid to go, they're paid to win, and it's a different time. And it's a time for people like all of you. I was back in the trenches when we couldn't get anything. I couldn't graduate from school. Really, I'm in a chair and I drooled. Big deal. But now we don't have to fight that, but we're fighting other things. And I look out to all of you, and even though I try to think that I'm kind of the same age as some of you 30, 40-year-olds, you will be in my place in time to come to say, here's what we were doing back then. Voice recognition, it'll be unbelievable. We will see a change in this, and we will see it through companies supporting it. Toyota Foundation, we talked to them. Do you know what they did? They said, we're no longer a car company. We're a mobility company. We don't want to be known as a car. Mr. Asioko-san Toyota said this. We're going to be mobility. And right now, I'm going to give $1 million grant, and here's the parameters. Invent something that improves the life of somebody who's paralyzed from the waist down. That is the only parameter. Unbelievable. So I'm glad to be here. The things of the past are gone. We still have a ways to go. And there's one thing. Wait, someone was going to call me. Who's the doctor friend who was going to call me to remind me? Unlike other places, the social media is important. Oh, here it is. Yes. It's a doctor. Wave your hands. You're calling me here. Yep, what are you reminding me to? Thank you. And this is not as about just Tatiana, but she is the poster gal around the world for somebody with a disability that they can do it. And the sponsors look to see how many likes there are. Thank you very much. How many likes people have. Do you really like somebody with a disability? So I'm asking all of you to take your phone out, type in Tatiana McFadden on whatever, Facebook, Instagram, and it has to have a blue check. Yeah, please do this. Because it will help the sponsors say, oh, there is interest with people with disabilities. You mean you really do like watching them with sports? We just need to get the lights up. Anyway, I am honored beyond belief to accept this award. I'm just so touched. So thank you very much. Okay. Oh, thank you. Oh, my family. Thank you very much.
Wow. Next, we will be presenting one of the Academy's most prestigious awards, named after the late Dr. Gail Arnold from the Children's Hospital of Richmond, Virginia. Dr. Eugenio Monasterio will be representing the Children's Hospital Foundation to announce this award.
Hi, I'm Eugene Monasterio. I try not to wear the same thing because I was looking at the old pictures and I'm always wearing the same outfit. So, it's my privilege and honor to represent the Children's Hospital Foundation that evolved out of the Children's Hospital of Richmond. And this award that honors Gail Arnold, who ran the CP clinic in Richmond for many years. And was one of my mentors personally. The Gail Arnold Award for Best Free Paper Presentation goes to Brian Hoare. I guess get down. Well, there you go.
Thank you very much. An absolute honour to be here and also to be nominated and receive the Gail Arnold Award. The two Deborahs, congratulations on your amazing lifetime careers and award. Very, very amazing to be here to see you both receive that. And also, yes, so what I'm going to present today is a bit of a different presentation from what I'm going to do tomorrow. So I will sell the presentation tomorrow. Come and see a little bit more of what the content of this presentation is about. I'm going to present on a Cochrane Review update, which I initially undertook in 2007. But before I do that, what I'm going to do is to thank my co-authors. I'm predominantly a clinician who works 4 days a week, and I do research basically to guide my clinical practice. So in 1 day a week to undertake a task, which, to give you an idea of the Cochrane Review, when it's fully completed, will be around about 350 pages in length. So I do caution you, if you see the publication, not to press print prior to excluding some pages. But the most important person I need to thank is Dr. Margaret Wallen, who is one of the most intelligent people, I think, on this planet, but also a mentor and is the person that got me to this point. And I can tell you it took me close to 4 to 5 years to complete this. The other person also is in the audience, Professor Christine Imms. Those two really did get this review update across the line. So what I'm going to do is give you a very brief outline of what this paper and review is about. I'm going to assume that most of you know what constraint-induced movement therapy is about, but in brief, it is putting a constraint of some sort on the dominant hand and providing mass practice to a child's more affected upper limb. So the review, as I said, was first done in 2007. Like most meta-analysis and systematic reviews in the noughties, there wasn't a lot of evidence. So you can see the conclusions there. We advocated for further research using rigorous methodologies, and I think that call to arms was answered very much so. So if we look at that line, which indicates when I conducted the initial literature search, you can see there's been a huge explosion of literature. So not only was there an explosion in the randomised controlled trials and the lower level studies. And in total, there was about 135 studies at last count. I'll tell you how many randomised controlled trials in a moment. But there was also 14 other systematic or narrative reviews undertaken at this time. There's probably more currently being undertaken as well. So what is the difference? Why is this review perhaps a little bit different, and perhaps the outcomes may or may not be the same? So I'm going to highlight the differences, and those are the comparisons that we undertook, the outcome measures that we included and excluded, and also the risk of bias assessments and the way that we rated the overall quality of evidence in this area. First of all, we needed to make fair comparisons. So many of the reviews lumped constraint-induced movement therapy as a whole, which is what we did, but then compared it to every other intervention and a comparison group that had been undertaken in the individual studies. It's a bit like saying, let's just put a heavyweight in a ring with a lightweight and saying who's going to win the fight. And we know what the answer would be. So we looked at making it a fairer fight or a fairer comparison. So we looked at constraint versus a low dose of intervention. And that really can be anything and everything, but it was really trying to pull out the dosage difference. Constraint versus a high dose, so not quite the same amount of dosage and predominantly of bimanual therapy. And then also constraint versus, so equal constraint versus equal, again, typically bimanual therapy, and looking at then constraint in various forms of constraint. Doing a Cochrane review, and those of you who have done meta-analysis, the aim is to pool data. It's a really problematic issue when there's 54 outcome measures used across the 36 included randomised controlled trials, with 52% of those only being used in a single study. It is good to see that, as you can see on the right-hand side, that some of the measures, such as the assisting hand assessment, is becoming the predominant measure where we can start to actually understand this area a little bit more in a meta-analysis. So we made some tough decisions around excluding outcome measures. We excluded those that did not have adequate reliability or validity in children with CP, and we also, there were many occasions where standardised assessments were, some of the items were removed, some of the scoring changed, so really that did invalidate many of these what were standardised measures. There are very, very rigorous and strict methodology for conducting a Cochrane review, and one of which is the risk of bias. And many of you may consider this perhaps to be quite harsh, the ratings. And if you've had a study that's been rated before using this method, it is relatively strict and quite harsh. What you can see here is that what I want to point out is the blinding of participants. When you've got a cast or a mitt on a child's arm, you can't blind. You cannot, there's no such thing as a double-blinded trial. So already when we're looking at the body of evidence, we're not looking at high-level or strong-level evidence. And also self-reported outcomes, although being extremely important, are also rated lower. What that means is when you use a grade approach for rating the overall body of evidence, is that we're never going to be able to get higher than a moderate level in this area. So it doesn't matter how many more trials are done, using a grade approach, which is again in line with Cochrane requirements, we're not going to have high quality evidence. And that's something I think for many of the therapeutic interventions that we provide to children with cerebral palsy, that is going to be the case. In summary, what did we find? So the initial Cochrane review in 2007 included 3 studies. This update, this is why it took so long, was 36 randomised controlled trials. We can't exclude papers published in other languages, so 4 were published in Persian. That creates difficulties, given we don't, none of the authorship group understood Persian. And also there was not just 36 randomised controlled trials, but it was published, they were published across 83 manuscripts. So trying to find out what what data related to what manuscript was, you really needed to be a bit of a sleuth or an FBI agent to uncover where the data was reported. There was a huge amount of children included in the studies, 1,264, and I think this would have to be probably the most studied intervention in children with cerebral palsy, both medical and or allied health interventions, conducted across a really broad range of cultures in 19 countries. So the major ones were Australia and USA with 5 each. Samples ranged from, again, we're thinking about randomised controlled trials, 11, to, thankfully, trials such as the one done in Italy with 105 participants, with a mean group size, population size of 35. The average age of children was 5.96. That came down a little bit further with some more recent studies of younger children, with a range of 3 months to 19.8 years. The most common device that was used to restrain children to apply this mass practice was a mitt or a glove, and the mean total number of hours applied across all the studies and across all the protocols of constraint was 129 hours. What's the conclusion? There was evidence that constraint-induced movement therapy resulted in improved bimanual performance, which was our primary outcome, and unimanual capacity when compared to a low-dose comparison. So when you had a lot of therapy versus not much, I think that answer was probably, we could have hypothesised that prior, but the data supports that. But compared to a high dose or dose matched, we didn't find a significant sort of positive outcome favouring constraint. The quality of evidence, as I mentioned before, are the reasons it was low to very low. From a safety point of view, and I know that this has been a issue in the past, that overall we concluded that constraint was safe, and for time reasons I'm not going to go through each of those points. But on the whole, a lot of studies failed to report any safety data, and we don't know whether that's because they didn't collect it or whether or not it simply wasn't reported. So what's the implications for the outcome of this review? There is support for the implementation of a well-defined, time-limited, goal-directed block of constraint-induced movement therapy or bimanual therapy at an intensity greater than low-dose comparisons. And those low-dose comparisons are typically referred to as usual care. So really there is a time now where we can say there's no further studies to be done where we've got a comparison group of usual care, I think, from an ethical point of view. The specific mode of constraint, there are many, many, many different models, is far less an issue than the implementation of an intensive, carefully targeted and well-supported program. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I invite Dr. Leanne Sagzuski, who, under the direction of the Research Committee, is here to present the AACPDM's 12th Annual Mentorship Award.
Thanks. Okay. Thank you very much. Slides.
The slides up, please.
Thank you. So it's my honour and privilege to present this year's Mentorship Award to Professor Rosalind Boyd. And I'd just like to tell you a few things about Ros. Ros completed her undergraduate training in physiotherapy and then completed her PhD in human bioscience. Roberta Shepherd, who's pictured on the left there, was a key mentor for Ros very early in her career and trained her in motor learning. And it was Roberta who really inspired Ros to work as a paediatric physiotherapist. Since her initial training, clinical training at Sydney Children's Hospital and what was known as the Spastic Society in New South Wales. Ros then spent 10 years across a couple of continents working. She started in London, where she worked at the Portland Hospital for Women and Children in the neonatal intensive care unit, and then went on to work at Great Ormond Street, working in an orthopaedic research capacity. She then went on and worked at Guy's Hospital, where she was involved in a hip surveillance study conducted by David Scrutton. From there, she went back to Australia to the Children's Hospital in Melbourne, where she undertook clinical trials in botulinum toxin for her PhD, and then commenced her work with preterm infants, upper limb rehabilitation studies, and she was a co-developer of the Cerebral Palsy Quality of Life questionnaires. For the last 11 years, Ros has been the Scientific Director of the Queensland Cerebral Palsy Rehabilitation and Research Centre at the University of Queensland in Brisbane, Australia. One of her major achievements, and one of the things that she would say she's most proud of, is the establishment of a centre for research excellence, and that's the Australasian Clinical Trials Network. The breadth of her work has included over 275 peer-reviewed publications and many book chapters, and she's supervised many research higher degree students and mentored many early career researchers as well. Ros has had a long-standing involvement with this academy since 1997 and has served on a number of committees. Members of Ros's team have been awarded the Gail Arnold Award on 3 occasions. Ros has also been involved in the International Cerebral Palsy conferences and has served on a number of the boards and scientific committees. And she's currently a member of the International Affairs Committee of the Australasian Academy of Cerebral Palsy and Developmental Medicine. So this gives you a list of some of the PhD students that Ros has supervised over the many years. So she supervised 25 PhD students, 18 to completion, and Ros has supported all of her PhD students very generously to come to this academy and present their work. So on a personal note, I've worked with Ros when I started my PhD in 2006 on the INSIGHT trial. So Ros took me on as a PhD student, and at the time I had a 2-year-old and a 9-month-old baby. So the one thing I learned about Ros very early on is that she's a very brave woman. Recently I had to do some preparatory work for a workshop, and I needed to interview a leader in the field. So at the 11th hour, which is pretty usual for me, I rushed into Ros's office and asked if she minded if I could interview her. And of course, she gave me her time. And that's the next point I'd like to say about Ros, is that she's an incredibly generous person with her time. She always makes time for her students and the people she's mentoring, be they researchers or the clinicians that we're affiliated with. So anyway, I had this interview, and one of the questions was, that I asked Ros was, how do you measure your success? What's the metric by which you measure your success? To which Ros replied, I measure my success by the success achieved by the students, the researchers and clinicians who I mentor. So Ros has mentored many students, researchers and clinicians from many diverse professions and across many areas of cerebral palsy research. And it's not just PhD students who she's mentored. She's also mentored clinical doctorates, many honours students, and many from both physiotherapy and medicine. So I talked before about the Australasian Clinical Trials Network that Ros is very proud to be leading. And this network involves 5 sites across Australia and New Zealand. And this is really moving cerebral palsy research forward in Australia, particularly in the area of early detection and early intervention. And importantly, this network has created a framework for mentoring students and early career researchers who are conducting research along the pipeline from bench to bedside and ultimately to implementation and translation. Ros has many international collaborators, which I think has been mutually beneficial both for her students and researchers in Queensland, but also international students and researchers. And we've been able to conduct many collaborative research projects together. One of the very exciting developments is the work in Kolkata, India that Ros has been doing with Dr. Kath Benfer. They have trained over 200 clinicians on early detection and the implementation of a clinical trial called LEAP-CP, which stands for Learning Through Everyday Activities and Play. So there's a few pictures here. Ros has mentored both researchers and clinicians across many areas of research in cerebral palsy, from working on early detection and early intervention, clinical trials of intensive models of rehabilitation and parenting studies, neuroscience, and early natural history. And I don't think Ros would want me to not acknowledge the great team of researchers, clinicians and students that form the Queensland Cerebral Palsy Rehabilitation and Research Centre. So now I'd like to invite Professor Rosalind Boyd to accept the 2018 AACPDM Mentorship Award.
Well, thank you, Leanne. And I must say this academy has been so welcoming from the moment I arrived, I think, was back in Portland. And I remember the first time I got on in the lift, I met Jeff McLaughlin, and he was so welcoming. And I looked down and he was the president, and I was sort of very overwhelmed. But I think it's just such an amazing academy, and so many people have come up to me even during this meeting, and it's good. And they said, it's great to see a physiotherapist getting this award. And I think it speaks to the sort of cross-discipline and multidisciplinary approach. And I think it's just wonderful that people from new students right through to researchers can interact and be making a difference. And I think one of the things that I learned when I was a young student was to sort of be passionate about cerebral palsy, and Roberta Shepherd sort of showed me that the first lecture that she gave. I thought, you're never going to run out of questions, there's always going to be something to answer. So I really enjoy coming to the Academy. It's been a wonderful experience, and look forward to continuing with my mentees. Thank you.
Thank you both. Next, I would like to introduce our guest lecturer to briefly talk with us about the European Academy of Childhood Disability. Professor Giovanni Cioni will provide an update from the EACD to share with you their recent activities. Dr. Cioni is from the University of Pisa, where he is a full professor of child neurology and psychiatry. Welcome.
I'm here.
I'm running short on words. Yes.
So that's for moving forward.
That's the one.
So very good. Hello. I'm very honored to be here and be able to speak to such a large audience. Thanks so much for the invitation. So you've been told that I'm Professor of Child Neurology and Psychiatry, University of Pisa. Pisa University was founded about 800 years ago. Quite a far time ago. I'm also director of a research hospital for neurodevelopmental disability. But the reason why I'm here, because I'm chair of the European Academy of Childhood Disability, founded about 35 years ago. We are running every year a meeting. The last one was in Georgia. You know that, Tilda? It was in Tbilisi, in Georgia. There was the 30 meeting of our society. We are in Europe. We have about 800 members, medical doctors, physical therapists, psychologists, and many other allied disciplines belonging to about 40 countries in Europe. And in 30 of them, we have a national coordinator. So we occupy with the yellow almost all Europe. The mission of EACD, I think, is very similar to the European Academy. We aim to improve health and participation of children with disability by improving research, by improving the transfer of research into clinical practice based on evidence. So we have many aims around that. But we are also facing very great problems in Europe, as in all parts of the world, for children with disability. Problem concerning diagnosis, problem concerning treatments, problem concerning resources devoted to problem regarding the differences in our continent among the different European countries. And those problems are increasing, unfortunately. And the austerity and the economical crisis was one of the reasons of such a deterioration, and we gave evidence to that. That was one of the aim, one of the mission of our society, of our academy. So we made such an inquiry, such as a survey in Europe, involving and Karen Norwich was the leading of such an initiative of EACD. And we show by interview of people, the participants were interviewed were both professional and many, many families, more than 1,000 of families and the professionals. And there was given evidence that in the last few years, there was a decreasing in the quality of services offered to persons with disability, children with disability in Europe, which is a terrible message that we are now trying to offer to public opinion in Europe, try to invert such a tendency. Well, we have, as I said, we have many aims to face, to improve such a situation. Our key areas of activity in this year are, on one hand, the global perspective within the International Alliance and with the strict link with the American Academy and with the Australasian, which is already fully existing. And then the communication strategy, and then our policy for training and education and clinical recommendation around that. Well, of course, one of the main tools, or the main tool for our activity are the annual meeting. So as I said, we have done more than 30, 31 next year, meeting of our academy. Let's just show you just a family portrait very shortly of the family portrait of our meeting, the last one. So that was Amsterdam, and Sarah Winter came here, came there. And then, as I said, Tbilisi, together we are stronger, which is a very important message, actually. And the next one, that is the last couple of minutes of my presentation, I will talk about the next one. They will going to be next year in Paris. And then there will be the other one, and then I stop the series of family portrait, which is going to be in 2020 in Poznan. So you see, we move from a different part of Europe, having a specific goal to choose one or choose another capital in terms of geography, in terms of systems how the children are treated. So Poland 2020, organized by Marek Józwak, who is also part of this society. So I said it's going to be in Paris. And I need, first of all, I need to clarify a very important issue. I'm talking about Paris, but I'm not talking about Paris in Maine, nor Paris in Texas. You know that I was checking my computer last night. There are 29 towns in USA called Paris. You are thieves of European towns' names. You even putting on like in Paris, Texas. I'm sorry, Mauricio, I'm mentioning Texas, but because anyway, they have even an Eiffel Tower there in Paris, Texas. Incredible. Well, I want to be very clear. I'm talking about Paris, France. Paris, France, the beautiful town, and the beautiful venue where we are going to have next year the meeting, the Cité des Sciences, the City of Science. which is a very nice complex within the town with many facilities, quite similar to this one, more beautiful, of course. But anyway, no, that is very, very convenient. That is very beautiful. Similar to, let's say. Right, so that is good for people coming for the meeting, but for in the spare time, for people accompanying, Paris, there are food for everything. Food for any type of taste for the people. The motto is going to be innovation for participation. So we try to talk about innovation and how innovation should lead to a better participation of children in their environment. So the motto is innovation for participation. So we're talking about therapeutic intervention, innovative, on technology, the innovation in healthcare organization, diagnostic and assessment innovation, enhancing participation, special focus on how to develop innovation and what is innovation, which is a very important issue. So the two most important persons, Sylvain Brochard, who is a physiatrist in the University of Brest in the northern part, and Christopher Newman, who is president of the AACD Scientific Committee from Switzerland. And then there are many international multidisciplinary society and academic involved in this organization, both from France, organization from the orthopedic surgeon, from the physical therapist, and many European, like European Society of Pediatric Neurology and many other. So Paris and the venue is very well located. You can reach very easily within Paris and from other continent. So please, if you are interested, come to Paris. It's a city of science, it's a city of history and culture, and it's also the city of love, as we know. So just the last slide, I was speaking before coming here. Sylvain gave to me the last slide, so I was asking, so what about the gala dinner? In Paris, the gala dinner should be a very important one. And apparently, well, he didn't tell me exactly what is going to be the gala dinner of next May 24. So I might guess, give you some smell. It might be either the Royal Palace of Versailles, a dinner there. That could be an option. Or can be a dinner and the show at Moulin Rouge. Why not? Innovation, everything can be possible. Or if you prefer a very romantic cruise and dinner along the river, the Paris River, and with the bateau mouche, which are very famous. So 2 days, one website, one last point. May 23-25, the date. And the deadline, that is very important, put a note on. We have only 20 days to send some material to. Do that. Innovative proposal, and the hashtag is over there. So that is what I want to say. Let me just end it up by thanking again Gilda. Can I give you something as a small present? You have been giving present to everybody. Now it's a small present to you.
Oh, you're so kind.
This comes from Italy,
Thank you. Oh, marvelous. I look forward to it. Thank you.
Limoncello.
I will enjoy that very much.
Okay, thank you all, and thanks again for the invitation and the participation.
Thank you.
It is truly wonderful to have our partners around the world, and I would like to invite one more precious partner here to talk with us about our Australasian colleagues at the Australasian Academy for Cerebral Palsy and Developmental Medicine. Christine Ims visiting us here from her position in Australia and Melbourne. Yes. Yes. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. You know, there are lots of people you don't want to follow up on the stage, aren't they? And Giovanni's one of them. But actually, this has been a brilliant session. It's been so exciting, and the awards have richly deserved, and really wonderful to hear about what people have been contributing, and really exciting session. So I'm pleased to be at the end of it, but I'll let you go in 2 seconds. So I am the president of the Australasian Academy of Cerebral Palsy and Developmental Medicine. I'm also a professor of occupational therapy at the Australian Catholic University. But I just wanted to give a few minutes around the activities that we've been doing at the Australasian Academy and do, as Giovanni has done, invite you to our next meeting. So we have a fairly small, growing, emerging academy. We're actually quite young, founded in 2001. We have biennial meetings every 2 years, so we have just held our 9th. So much younger academies than the European and the American academies. We have a similar structure to what I have been hearing over the last few years, or the last few times I've been at the American Academy, of committees that support the board in its activities. So probably those of you in the American Academy would recognise some of the titles of our committees, and our activities are very much in line with the mission and values of our academy, which are also about really promoting evidence-based practice and education for those working with people with childhood onset disability. I thought it would be nice to put up the names of our board members just so you can pick out your favourite Australian and maybe make contact with them around their activities in the Australasian Academy, but also to acknowledge those board members who recently left the board. We've had a fairly stable board for the last several years because we started out with a very large board that was representational across Australia and New Zealand, and we have strategically been trying to reduce the size of the board. So we really very much thank those who have been serving on the board for a long time and have stepped down. So Adam Scheinberg, Robin Shepherd, Maria Kiaragis and Kath Morgan and Jill Rodder. We have a newly launched website last year, and I really encourage you to go and have a look at our website and see the sort of activities that we've been doing. There is a little "You Can Join Now" button as well, so if you'd like to become a member, please think about that. And then I thought I would just talk about one of the activities that we've been collaborating on as an academy over the past sort of 12 to 18 months. And this is a collaboration across a range of organisations, including Ability First Australia, the Cerebral Palsy Alliance, Cerebral Palsy Australia, Freedom and Choice in Cerebral Palsy Society in New Zealand, our academy, and many consumer representatives. And we've been working together to build an Australia and New Zealand cerebral palsy strategy, which is really something that we would aim to create a document that outlines the priorities for support, research, advocacy and knowledge translation identified by people with cerebral palsy, families and professionals in the field. The strategy is coming together. There are 4 key broad goal areas with sub-goals and action plans and timelines and deliverables. But the 4 big areas are inclusion and engagement, health outcomes, intervention and disability support, and cure and prevention. And I know that we would recognise many of the people that we've been listening to over these several days would be able to contribute to some of that. But it gives us some drive and direction that actually is built from the ground up, which is really important. Our conference this year, which we very delightedly hosted Sarah Winter at, was in Auckland in New Zealand. Our empowerment and partnership motto, similar framework to the Academy here. We had 550 attendees, which was fantastic, from 23 countries around the world. So that was very good. Now, our next conference, because we only run them every 2 years, is in 2020. So March 2020 has to go in your diary. I'm hoping this video will work. It's not looking good. Oh, yep, no, I've turned it off. Go back. Too impatient. There's a little man behind the scenes doing something. Hold conferences in beautiful places. My colleagues and friends in Western Australia said it's not enough to show the film, you need to tell them something about Perth, so here it is. Population 2 million, average temperature in March 29 degrees or 84 Fahrenheit, very nice. Average rainy days 1, very unlikely to happen. Claim to have the best beaches, claim to have the best wine. There's lots of competition in Australia for both of those. The locals apparently like to be called personalities. And their favourite pastime are quokka selfies, and you too could get into this. So that's our next biennial conference. Now, the one after that for us is very excitingly going to be the next International Alliance conference, which will be in 2022, somewhere on the eastern seaboard of Australia. So you need to plan ahead. 2 years' time, Western Australia. 2 years after that, east coast of Australia. And we'd like to see you there. So thank you very much for the generous, very large generosity of having me here at the Academy. I have enjoyed it immensely. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know we've run over a little bit. Just a couple of things to remind you. The instructional courses begin at 4. In the meantime, you can still vote at the registration desk for posters and photo submissions. And I hope we'll see many, many of you at the networking dinner tonight at the gorgeous Music Hall Ballroom. There will be buses available from the 5th Street side of the Hilton, or if the weather stays nice, it is probably a 15-minute walk. Thank you.